Alright, hello and welcome. I will look at the King's Gambit in this video, and now the sound is probably a bit noisy, like the background noise, but I will try to fix this later on. For now I just wanted a clean recording, because I noticed this really glitchy in the first one I made, so I will try to improve it on that. Now let's just begin with the King's Gambit, and first I want to look at all the alternatives to Knight f3 here. And I think against Knight c3 we should play check, King e2, and now the move b6. I think that is very useful to play black in these positions, because you really find out that a king move in the opening may not be such a bad idea actually. Like it's hard to exploit if white just plays solid moves, and lashing out with moves like d5, although they may be good concretely, often it's just one line that's good for black, and in this position I think b6 is actually stronger as well. Of course, intending bishop a6 check, and now we have knight b5 against this, and I didn't even consider what happens on c6, but I assume there must be a reason. Well, maybe it's just ignored, but I think everyone plays something like knight c6, knight f3, and queen g4, and if h3 just queen g3, and d4 castles and king f2. And now there's a threat of knight takes a7, so king b8 or bishop b7 are the necessary moves to cover that. But I think bishop b7 is more to the point, because we don't really need this king move. Actually it can harm us, because somehow white can try moves like a5 and go all out for an attack, and then our king should actually run the other way. So castles is just useful for getting the rook in. And now let's say bishop e2, and in this position I believe f5 is a great move, and the point is to make the e-pawn move, and well, it's really hard not to move the e-pawn here, and this is why bishop b7 was so necessary, or probably is the best move, and that's because it's attacking g2, because if we clear the diagonal then queen takes g2 would be really strong, and that's basically the idea. So let's say if we take this, then a6 is really strong, and here we have the trick of knight takes d4, and this one picks up the rook and with an ongoing attack, and if you take with the queen then there's bishop c5 winning the queen, and I think this is actually a really clear refutation of this variation. You do have some trickiness with let's say h3 and now moves like queen e1 here, and black must still be really precise, but I think in the end it's good for black. So I think this is probably what you have to familiarize yourself with, if you ever meet this variation. Let's say the normal moves for white, then black gets a good game with f5 or even the preparatory rook e8. Yeah, so then there's also d4, but I don't want to consider it. It's very similar. The only difference is that actually maybe going check and well, both moves are pretty horrible, but maybe even d6. And if you really want to be simple, and queen e7 is annoying, because next you can go moves like d5 and just, I think it's simple to play as black. Now it's not so easy to play against the bishop's opening, and in this position I think that knight c6, knight f6 and queen h4 are all kind of good moves, and c6 is actually also very interesting. Oh, my nose. I think I caught a cold. Anyways, so knight c6 and now d4. If knight c3, then check, and bishop c5 forces the exchange of queens. So d4 is close to forced. If knight f3, then g5 is a good move. And here check. And the point behind knight c6 was actually that it was a useful move, because in this variation now we have bishop g4, and if we had played it like the check here, then the d pawn had not been moved. So let's say check here and d6, then white can play knight f3, and there is no bishop c5 against knight c3. So if we play knight c3, bishop g4 here, now there is well, there was no bishop c5 because we blocked the d pawn. So that's why knight c6 should probably be played to force white to go d4. And now bishop g4 is the main variation, and I think the only real try for white here is bishop b5 here, and this may be good enough, but I think black can hope for something if he plays enterprisingly. Maybe a6 or castles. This is a bit tricky though, and probably the more normal move is knight c3 here, but I think this is just winning for black because of the variation with bishop takes f3 and castles. And now oh wait, not castles, g5 I mean. And now knight d5 is threatening a fork, and also knight b5. But knight b5, then we have to cover f7, so, or we should cover f7. So I think rook c8 is a good move, just covering this for the moment, and next going a6 and bishop g7. And if it's really hard to play something else, maybe king g2 is a move, and then if white tries to get the king out, then black should play bishop g7 and try to make the pawn on d4 move. and if it's moving then we get the e5 square, and that would be really nice. So yeah, g5, and I think knight d5 is kind of critical. Castles, and here c3. Bishop b5 is met with knight b8, I believe. I didn't check this, but c6 is anyways the plan for black. So c3 is probably more reliable, but it's not, because the move rook e8 is extremely strong. And now bishop b5, I believe f5, and the pressure against the e-pawn is enough to cause serious issues. So if white tries to escape with the king, now there is the extremely nice maneuver knight d8, and well, I actually believe I figured this out myself, and I don't think it has been played before. And now let's say rook g1, then the point is to play f5, and now the pressure against the e-pawn forces a commitment, or let's say bishop d3, but as soon as white goes back without regaining the pawn, then it's just black attacking white's king. Like with we have 3 pawns against 2, and there's no attack on the black king. So white should probably take this, and now c6, and we get d5 in, and when the pawn structure is symmetrical on the queen side, then it will be decided on the king side. So bishop d6, and this is generally the best square for the bishop. And now knight h6, and the point is to also look at f4, no, the f5 pawn. For instance, if something like queen, let's see, maybe queen tried to swing the queen over, then black can just attack the f pawn and regain this pawn with a great position. And maybe a more natural move is bishop d2. But now comes g4, and if this is taken, then f3 is, and it's pretty hard to stop the mate on h2 actually. So this variation is completely busted. I think the last real shot for white is in this position with bishop b5. And alright. And if you don't like this bishop b5, then I think you can choose between either going knight f6 after d4, or going the immediate queen h4 check. And now d6. And in this variation we can also try the same, but I believe queen h6 or queen f6 should be played. And even though the queen is a bit weird, I think this is the other objective way to try to prove an edge as black. And after something like this, going bishop e6. So the bishop's gambit is actually not very easy to refute, and well, you can probably the simplest way to get a small edge is after these moves to go knight f6, and after knight c3, bishop b4, knight e2, there is the move f3 to disturb the pawn, and now d5. And this one should be slightly better for black. Let's say something like this, then you can see that the fractured pawns are a bit of a problem, but it's not one-sided. Like white does get their g file, and if we can complete development, then it's not so clear. Alright, so now let's go to knight f3, and I think d6 is a bit of a mistake. Well, h6 is a bit better. Well, this is just my opinion, of course. And g5 and knight f6 are even slightly better than both of them. And I think knight c6 is interesting, but it's not completely clear that the knight should go to c6 this early. And the move like c6 is also very interesting in this position. Actually, many strong players played it. And I think bishop e7 should be kind of equal after knight c3. And how does it go? Like, is it knight f6? Well, I think it's not so easy to play black there, and I actually would prefer white in many of those positions. The move knight e7 is a bit of a sideline, and why would you play this? Well, you're just afraid of e5 after knight f6, and I don't think it's an issue. But this move should be met with queen e2, and I think white gets a small edge here, but I'm not completely sure. And now let's go to g5, and I think even if you want to play the Fischer variation, you should start with g5, because after the move d4, then black can play g4, whereas after d6, d4, g5, now white has g3, which is very interesting as an attempt for an advantage actually, but I think it should be okay for black because of let's see, this variation. No, not closing it. Yeah, bishop h6 is the move, and now knight c3, bishop g5, and knight g2, f3, knight f4. And I actually think it's still very hard to play this position for black, but you may call it a slightly improved version of what I'm going to show next. And this is probably the reason why you should play g5. Even if you intend to follow it up with h6 or d6, I don't think you should be worried about, for example, bishop c4. Then even knight c6 is quite good, since against the bishop's opening, knight c6 is actually one of the main moves. And well, even playing g4 is actually very good for black. And yeah, so knight c3 is probably the most principled variation as white, just discouraging d5. And you should really not play g4 here, because after knight e5 white played a useful move in knight c3 instead of placing a pawn in the center, and the move queen h4 followed by this variation. Now the endgame is not so good for black. I think it's probably equal, but white can try, and the winning a rook should be leading to checkmate very soon. At least it should be a really big advantage. Is it queen h5 or queen f4? I think queen f4. But the combined threats of like knight d5 and something like knight d1, knight f2, trapping the queen, should be decisive. And yeah, so black should play d6 or bishop g7, and well, you can also play knight c6 here, and this is worth mentioning. And probably g3 should be played, and trying to get into this variation. And now knight f6. Yeah, this is quite tricky. I believe d5 is on the cards, and maybe e5 is good. Well, I'm not sure about that, but I think knight c6 is a really good try for black if you play this. But principal variations are probably bishop g7 and d6. Now I think d6 is a bit more consistent, but only if you follow it up with g4. And now taking this piece is the only way to go, and in this position h5 is the best move. And while these positions are very tricky to play as both colors, I think if you didn't study this as black, you may actually get lost very quickly. But if you put in the effort in this specific variation, I think you may actually find that it's enough to prove an edge as black. And well, if you want, the problem for white in the King's Gambit is that black pretty much chooses what to play. The only time you can really say that white chooses is you can play some bishop c4, or after g5 you can tempt black into going into the Museo. But well, it's actually good for black, so I wouldn't even be worried about it. Yeah, so probably g5 is just a good move, but there are some if you don't like to play d6 or bishop g7, there is some with the idea to play a quick g4. You really have a bit of a problem, because if you play d6 with the idea of just playing safe with bishop g7, I would say safe in quotation marks, because this is actually really dangerous for the black player. Something like yeah, it should be noted that if black goes something like h6 here, just intending g4 against this taking on f4, then there is rook g1, and I think this should be kind of decent for kind of good for white actually. Maybe I'm speaking too soon. Is it king d2? Maybe something like this. So what about knight h5? Yeah, I guess this is a try, and maybe bishop e3 and just let black take this, because, well, this exchange looks really promising. Maybe knight d5 is also a move. Yeah, so I think that black should avoid this, and probably g4 must be played soon. And if we enter these variations, I think white is very close to having a real edge here. Like, seriously, I think white actually is better in this position. And the probably one of the better tries is c6 and just castles. And if you try to play safe in this variation, you will often just end up getting mated on e8, because your king is already lined up and you're far away from castling. You need at least 3 moves to prepare castling. Well, kingside is really dangerous after h3. Now you can play something like say b5 here, but even if black gets in b4, I think knight d2, knight d1, knight f2 is actually a really nice maneuver to put pressure on the g-pawn. It supports h3, and after h5, let's say bishop g5, and already I think there are serious issues for black. Even here, maybe e5 can be possible, like e5 and then something like bishop g5. But even a slow move, like, well, slow is a bit wrong, but it's h3 is always useful. And now even but knight f5 was allowed even for many moves. Yeah, so knight e7 should not be played because knight f5 is good. So yeah, probably b5 immediately, and if b4, just knight d1. And let's say something like this is tried. Well, it looks kind of interesting. Maybe e5. Well, I guess just knight f2. And if black really wants this, like maybe queen d1, but queen d2, and let's say we trade. And now, where does the black king go? It's really hard. Like, knight f5 is coming, and h3 will crack open the position. Very soon, I believe, like, let's say just knight d7. Maybe even knight takes g4 is possible here, with some attack intended, like, I don't know exactly, but something like this. I would not be comfortable with black. But even so, let's just say h3 and h5. And if it comes to that, I wouldn't really be happy if I saw something like this on the board. Like, I probably e5 is just good. But even if not, you can try to prepare something. And castle queenside, well, e5 probably, or is it possible to take this? Yeah, but anyways, like, now the black king is clearly the unsecure one, and if just castles here, well, knight f5 is coming, and, well, you can see that there's a huge attack coming. And well, if something like knight c6, then just castles. And here black actually has problems moving, because you can't get the queen and the bishop to squares where you can castle. So I think maybe something like knight e7 is a bit tricky, but I probably just rook e1 anyways. And if c6, probably knight f5. Well, this is not so clear. Yeah, but it's not easy to play as black, and even if you don't have knight f5, just go h3 and bishop f4 maybe, and very soon there will be a breakthrough. Good luck defending, I would say, if you play black in this position. And this is probably the main point behind this variation. It's actually what you want is the closed position with the chances to attack the king. And well, that's why h4 is probably not the best move, and it's just because black has so many options to get a slightly better position, and there's really no prospects for white. Whereas with knight c3 there really are prospects, and black has to be extremely careful. If you play something slow, or let's say intending just to cover the e5 square, then this is probably what you have to go for as black, and I do think black is better, but it's not easy to play. And if you check out correspondence games, actually many of the games are drawn, even in today's standards. There's many ways for black to go wrong, because the king just never finds safety, and something like e5 or d5 or both will just be really dangerous. So a creative white player may actually find something to stir up a lot of trouble for you. Now let's try the variation I like to play, and this is knight f6. And I think for practical tournament play this is probably the easiest. And if you put in some effort in this one, it's really more black deciding what to do and not white as much, because white really doesn't have the choices of knight c3, d4, when to play g3, like maybe sometimes h4 is possible, but in this position you wouldn't play h4, and d4 hangs the e-pawn, bishop c4 hangs the e-pawn, so it's really putting a question to white immediately. And I think there are, let's see, there is only e5 that I really think is challenging, but knight c3 is kind of interesting, because you enter the modern variation, and but you have had to play knight c3, and this is clearly the worst variation for white, I think. Maybe bishop e2 or something is slightly worse, but you get the point. And something like this, I think just g5, and oh wait, first bishop e7, because the pawn is immune because of queen e4. And let's say something like this, and I believe in a position like this that black should be better in every variation. even though this is kind of tricky to play, and it's on black to prove. Well, it's on white to prove compensation, but it's also on black to prove how to maneuver his pieces, because this d pawn is kind of annoying. And well, there's also safe alternatives to let's say to g5 here. There is also knight c6 and bishop g4, just creating problems. And well, before I enter the real knight f6, let's just look at the modern variation. And I think bishop d6 or knight f6 are the main moves. And here I would probably play the check. And the normal move is c6, but knight d7 is also a move. And white generally ends up a pawn, but black has the bishop pair. So it's very double-edged. And I think c6 is probably more safe, but you do give up a pawn. And I think something like wait, bishop d6 is probably the better move. And now there's knight bd2, castle c3, and I think h6 or bishop g4 are the main moves. And now just castles. I think h6 is included for some technical reason, to prepare g4 once the knight moves, like if we somehow move the knight. Actually, if you consider if knight e5 here and the queen was not on d8, then there would have been something like bishop h7. So let's just consider rook e8. And I think knight e5 is kind of a good move in these positions. Now probably knight c4 is the move to gain a tempo at least, and maybe a4. Yeah, this looks kind of interesting. But I do think that white has some ideas in these positions, and it's not one-sided at all. So let's just go to knight f6 now. And now my night vision came on. I think I'll let's see. Yeah, I took it off again, so the lightning will return. Let's see. Yeah, and now e5 is the main move, and knight h5 should be played. And here white has a few options, but I think bishop e2 is by far the best one. Or let's say, when you play the King's Gambit, sometimes it's not about the best one, but the most challenging one to meet. And in this regards, maybe something like queen e2 is the trickiest, because if white does something like with g4, then you really have to know what you're doing. And oh, I did a mistake. d6, and here bishop g4 and knight g3, and now queen takes. There is bishop h4, winning the queen. So white should pick up the 2 pieces for the rook, but he does have to concede castling rights and also probably give up a pawn. Is it d takes e5 or I'm not 100% sure, but maybe knight c6 is the move. Well, it's hard to say. Wait, let's see. Maybe d5 actually. It looks familiar. Anyways, so black gets 2 pawns for the rook and 2 minors for white. 2 minors against the rook and 2 pawns. And this is unbalanced and maybe something white can try. But I do believe that black is close to winning with best play. Well, actually I think black is winning. And if not, then probably something like this is going to be played. And I think this is still kind of good for black, but this is tricky. And because the knight on h5 really needs a square now. I think maybe f6 is possible, but let's say I think often bishop g4 is necessary just to keep the knight for long enough. And this can be really hard to play as black. The other tricky variation is knight c3, but objectively probably not the best. And in this position bishop e2. And this can also arise after knight c3 on move 4 or 3. And if d5, if white plays e5, then I think knight h5 is actually quite good, but also knight e4 is possible there. But in this move order you are actually forced to go to h5, so it doesn't make sense to really learn another variation. And in this position h6 has been played most, I think, but I believe it's actually a mistake because the crazy move knight g1, and now giving up this exchange actually is pretty good for white. But I do think I did not find a clear win, but it's really hard to play. And yeah, d4, bishop b6, knight f4, and either castles queenside or let's see, maybe I think bishop e7 and maybe c3 to stop knight b4 ideas. But even something like let's say just castles, and I'm not sure you want bishop a6 because then you're weakening the light squares for yourself, and it may help the queen escape, like after g5, and also h5 may be possible then. So I think something like bishop e3 and let's see. Now I think bishop f3 is actually probably the way to go, but there is bishop c4 here, king f2. Yeah, it's very tricky and you have to be very precise with both colors actually. And now let's say g5, then I think bishop f3 is somehow like bishop f3. Now if g5 you have this queen b3 is a double attack on the e pawn and b7, and I think this is 1 point behind bishop f3, but you have to get the move order right. and in the end I did not find anything close to a win for black, and it was only white trying to prove some advantage, trying to trap the queen, in other words. And the best move for black is g5 here, and now if white castles, then just rook g8, and it should be really clean for black, because there is no pressure against the center, and then we can just start attacking white actually. And well, the other move is obviously knight takes g5, but this variation is good for black. And in this position, knight b5, there is knight a6, and after, well, taking this pawn is not really good because you lose too much time. And queen f3 attacks the f pawn. I think if knight a7 and back, maybe rook g8 is good here, I think. And yeah, it's really difficult to play white because you're lacking the time to pick up the f-pawn. And I believe a huge attack may come here, like for black, even f6. So queen f3 I believe is the best move. And now somewhat paradoxical move is c6, just asking white to enter. And knight d6, I think rook takes d6 is probably the most convincing. And the plan is to go rook g8 and try to trap this bishop. Now probably the queen has to move, and still it's not very easy to play as this as white. I think maybe not. Maybe this was inaccurate. Yeah, maybe bishop g4 here actually, and just trade this because now the pawn is even weaker. And yeah, so I think probably knight a7 is a bit more critical, but they are both critical in their own variation, because, well, it's still a game, let's say. And now at this point black threatens rook b7. Rook d7 is actually really nice, a multi-purpose move, as they say. And now c3, knight c7, bishop g3, and queen d8. Now the queen can always help out defend the king if necessary, and in the meantime we will just maneuver this knight to f5, which is quite a good square. So I think white should probably try something like a4, and here the white should probably try this move, but black has to go queen c8, and then soon the bishop will be attacked. And if you don't move the bishop here, then actually rook g8 would be a double attack, which is very funny. Like if you play a4, a5, then rook g8, and you'll have to defend really awkwardly, because if you remove the bishop, knight f5 and bishop e7 is an unstoppable queen trap. So bishop e2, and now I think h5 is a move here, but rook g8 should also be good. Wait, I think h5 is actually maybe even better, but I'm not completely certain. Yeah, but anyways, rook g8 should be good there, so let's just play that. And maybe h5 here or knight f5, and they should both give an advantage for black. It's just really awkward for white king. Alright, so let's go back. Well, there is also bishop f3 in this position, but I think f6 is good enough after something like knight c6. And if this pawn is taken, maybe bishop c5 is good, or just castles. But I think d4, the e pawn was also hanging, and now f6, and this is not an issue for black. Rook d8 and king c8 will just castle by hand, and then it's white's king who's getting attacked. So knight c3 is not really that good. And now we'll have to look at d4, which is the most common move, I believe. And in this position d5 is just very good. And now white can try various things, but maybe the principled variation is c4, but this fails to g5. And now taking g4, and this is not good because of this check. Now queen f2 is pretty much forced, because otherwise there's bishop g4, bishop h6, and huge problems for white. And in this position bishop g4 means that there's really nothing going on. Black is just winning a piece up. So c4, g5, and now g4 is trickier, and you shouldn't take this because of rook g1. So knight g7, and I think h4 is bad here. I think you can take on g4 and play knight e6, and if this is taken, then h5 is extremely strong. Now knight c3, h takes g, and this check is just met with bishop d7. And here we will give up an exchange again, like in many other variations, and black is just winning here because the queen is offside and we have a bunch of pawns going down at the white king. It's safe to say that you will lose this if you play white. And there's also c6 here, but that's probably a bit tougher to play. Yeah, so c4 is really not a good move. Bishop e2 is a better try, but now just g5, and if we go into this variation and c4 in this position, then d4 is good enough for a clear edge for black. Knight c6, and here rook g6 is a very nice move. And the point behind this is that d5 we have a check, and the rook now is ready to go to h6 and deliver checkmate. And that's going to be mate. And if this is not done, then black just has a simple position with something like even a6 here is good, and you can actually choose either way. They are both good. Black should be winning. Yeah, and even here d5, there's always this bishop c5 check. And it's going to move mate in all variations. Like, probably the best move here is bishop rook f2, just giving up more material. And if you, let's say, move the bishop, then I think maybe even the move knight takes d4, because if you take this, something like this, and black has really nice compensation here with I believe 2 or 3 extra pawns and for an exchange, and this light squared bishop is actually worth just as much as a rook, if you ask me. Yeah, so I think even that was possible here. Yeah, I didn't check that in a year or so, but it should be like this. And yeah, there's really not much else to look at in this variation. If let's say that white just plays slow with maneuver knight e1 or knight e2, makes sense, but then we just have knight g7, and any attempt to play g3 just fails to knight f5, bishop h3 and knight f5, and black is actually mating white pretty soon. And let's say this variation, then I think just safe simple moves like bishop e6, knight c6, queen d7 and castles should be good, and it's just very hard to play as black. No, as white. I think he's soon running out of moves. Maybe something like a4, just knight d7 or knight c6, and this should be very good. Like you can even choose where to put your king. If white starts pushing the queenside pawns, you can just play bishop e7 and move the king to h8. And well, I don't really see a plan for white. g3 can almost always be ignored and even taken at many points. And let's say we get some position like this, and now maybe queen d7, knight c2, and very often black just plays let's say bishop e7 and f6 is very normal, but not just breaking down the center from with the only lever we have. And another way is just playing h5 or something. Like even here knight h4 should be really dangerous, and followed by actually moves like bishop h3 and sacrifices are soon working for black. Yeah, so this is just not a good variation. So now let's play bishop e2. And this is clearly maybe the objectively best move, and the point is just to target this knight before it gets going, and I think g5 should be played. If you want equality here, then d6 is good enough. One more point is that knight c3 is actually the anti-d6 move, because queen e2, d5, white gains a tempo and places the queen on f2, and something like this. And in this variation it's just a tempo gain, and that's actually enough for it to be interesting for white. White intends to castle queenside, and then it's a lot of play left. So I think d6 here. The only thing is that against knight c3, then d5 must be played, or probably should be played rather. Now castles, and in this variation I think the move c3, black should play bishop d6 immediately, and now d4 can be met with taking this knight, and this is a really concrete idea with knight d5, and even if black has to give back the pawn, then black just has the better pawn structure and a really good position. Like, you don't get much better than these pawns. Like, and if rook takes, I think let's see, yeah, knight g4 or knight e4 should be good enough. So I think white should probably go knight d3, now bishop b6 or bishop d6, knight f4 and c5. And I think that stopping d4 is really key for black, and it just means that black has more space, and I think black is completely fine here. So let's see turn, but it's not really easy to play for a win there. So I think g5 is the most ambitious move, and it's very relatable to the early g5s, 3g5 as well. But the point is that now g3 is really hard to play, because we have the knight on h5. You know, knights on the rim are sometimes bad, but in this variation it's actually the star piece. I would say it's doing all the work. And now castles, and I like to move h6 here, and of course taking this pawn is not really that great because the h file is open, and well, I don't think it's black who's going to get attacked here. So a better move is d4, and in this position I really want to play knight g7, but that allows g3. So I've come, well, I think d6 or d5 are the best moves here, and d6 is very interesting, but I think d5 is very reliable and gives a small edge for black. Now white should probably play c4, and then we play c6, and the idea is that queen b3 we can play queen b6, and taking this pawn black gets a somewhat small advantage. I think something like this. And now if d5 and in this position, I think black should sacrifice an exchange here as well, like in almost every variation. It's just a different one every time. And well, if you like sacrificing exchanges, I believe knight f6 is really the line for you. Yeah, so I believe there are some, maybe you can play knight c6 here and try to avoid the immediate variation with d5, but I wouldn't really worry too much about that. And the other way to play is knight c3, bishop e6, and something like this, and now taking this pawn, black has queen d8, and something like knight f4 is not a problem, because we can trade the bishops, and something like well, even taking this is kind of interesting, but let's say something like this. Now white sacrificed a piece, but it shouldn't be that bad. Now I'm putting myself on the spot to make some good moves. Well, knight a5 maybe. Even just retreating with knight e7 shouldn't be a problem. Knight f6, you just take it. So this is not really good. And white can also try trading and going knight b5. But now king d7 is just in time to cover everything. And I believe black always is just in time. Like very often these variations comes down to one move, but I believe black is just in time, and that's enough for me. Like even if it's only one move, then I believe that's enough. Like probably knight c6 and knight, yeah, this is not done because the knight is protected, and black is just up a pawn, even though the pawns are a bit scattered or like doubled. I still think black has the edge here. Probably white should play queen takes d5 and try to survive, but if you're prepared, I think black should be better. And the reason why I think d5 or d6 in this position should be played is because knight g7 there is g3, and this is extremely tricky. Now if this is taken, then I believe bishop c4 is very strong, and the point is that just development. And now f6, which covers the sacrifices, then knight e4 and a4 or bishop e3, and white should be close to winning this. I believe soon the queen is out of squares. Like if you play bishop e7, then I think a4 and queen e2 is pretty much game over, because bishop b5 is threatened, and let's say king d8, then we have d5. Do we? Oh yeah, that's, maybe this is simpler. Now I became a bit unsure. Well, it should be really nice, like even if we just develop our pieces. Something like this, well, you are really asking for trouble. Now you get a double-edged position with black, and you do have chances to win, but I wouldn't do that over objective soundness. At least to this extent, where black may be lost if he doesn't know what to do. And now the also another critical variation is knight d2, but here I think black can play f5. And knight f3, there is let's see, bishop e7 and knight e5, I think rook f8 saves the day. So let's say this one, and now knight e5, rook f8, and this winning this exchange is not that clear, because black does have 3 pawns and the 4th one that may even survive. So I wouldn't I think black is actually better here, but it's not so easy to play. It's very often good to give up exchanges in this variation, because if you can simplify a bit, then the pawns are just very good. And probably the better move is d5 here. And after this variation, knight f5, I think black is slightly better. So yeah, and if not for this g3 move, then knight g7 would just be a good move, because if rook e8, rook e1, then we have d5, and if this is taken and we look at bishop b5 check, then king f8 is in time to cover, and the knight covers e8. So rook e1 would have won the queen, but doesn't. So, and probably the other way to play is d6 here, and I think this is actually quite a good move. Let's say rook e1, and now c6. The problem is that d4 is always met with c4, and now the rook is better placed. And if knight g7, then just taking this, or wait, is that right? Maybe bishop b5 check is a problem here, something like this. Yeah, that looks problematic. So I think the idea of double check should be blocked with c6. Now d5 is an idea for black, but white can't take this, and now something like bishop c4 or bishop d3, maybe bishop e7, but let's just say king f8, and now all the time white has to watch out for knight e4s and knight e5s, and maybe knight e5 was good on the last move, because the h knight is hanging, like giving up this, and then queen h5. Well, there's the check. Huh. Oh well. Yeah, but I think this is playable for black with the d6 and c6. Yeah, with c6, but this is also a slight concession, because if I could play knight g7 immediately, then I would just play d5 here, and well, yeah. So now let's look at the other main line, which is, well, h6 is kind of has been played once in correspondence, but black didn't follow it up correctly, and the other move is rook g8, which has been played a few times, and now I believe d4 or knight c3 are both the good moves. They may actually transpose. Maybe knight c3 is more accurate, because then g4 is a bit less attractive. But anyways, you may just play d4 here. So I think they just transpose. And d5 takes, bishop takes, and now d4. Black really has to play knight f6. And now knight b5. And now black really would have liked to have played h6, because now knight takes g5 is on. And the move c6 is probably best. Bishop f4, and well, there is also knight f7, but I do believe black gets a small edge in this position after something like bishop c4 and b5 and some developing moves, knight d7, intending bishop f8, king h8, bishop g7, and if black consolidates, then it's a piece for 2 pawns, which should not be quite enough. It's still very tricky to play as black, but I do believe that there is some slight edge there. And the other variation is bishop f4, and now we enter this way, this variation, and I think c3 and bishop c4 are the critical moves. After c3 I think h6, knight h5 or h6 and knight h5 here. Let's see, no, knight d5. Yeah, it's really tricky, but I think black gets a small edge with best play. And I think the drawing attempt, well, the main drawing attempt is bishop c4. Now rook g7 to cover the f-pawn, and d5. And in this position bishop g4 is a drawing line, which goes like this. 95, and in this position there is no winning a bishop because of queen b6 and takes. So rook e1. Now there is a forced draw like this, and this is equal. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, knight c3. Knight g5 and bishop f4, and in this position bishop c4, rook g7 and d5. I think knight f5 is more critical and it's more testing to white, but it's also a bit more challenging to play as black. d6, and now b4 is the only move, I think. Now knight c4 there is queen e2, and after c4 knight b4 there is queen e1 with the same trick. So c4, and now king f8, queen d2, h6, and something like queen g4, and this variation should be equal in the end, but black has all the prospects, and something like knight g5 here, and say maybe b4. Then there's bishop b6. No, then we have c5. Yeah, let's say something like b5 and knight a5 and perhaps rook e1. And now queen e8 is threatened, so probably something like bishop f6 or king g8. Bishop b6, there should be c5. Yeah, this looks like it's working. Something like and now just if this is taken, maybe we have the check, and even queen c8 is a move. So this should be good. This is close to mate. Oh, queen f5, and yeah, well, I think there's no point in analyzing this anymore. Even this one. Yeah, I think we have a mate here, like this. and if this one, there's mate. Yeah, so I think this is probably the battlefield for black and white. Like, black can take white down this road, and white has to prove that he has enough for the piece. Because you will see that it's 2 pawns for the piece here also, but in this variation white does get some advanced pawns, like right here. These 3 pawns are very annoying, but at the same time it's quite hard to play for white. Now yeah, I think that covers the whole variation actually, and the reasoning behind playing h6 instead of rook g8, at least if you want to try to win. I'm not saying that someone may not make a mistake in the other variation, but this is probably black's way of proving an advantage. Now, if you compare this variation with the Becker's variation, then I think it's clear that black has much better prospects, because there is no g3, and also it's harder to keep the center, because black is ready with d6 if he wants it. And if d5 is allowed, then this structure is very solid. And I think that pretty much covers everything. I didn't go very deeply into g5, but I will do even this h4 move is of course critical, but I think d6 is the simple solution. I think white shouldn't play this, which is why I'm not covering it, but here bishop e7 should be a good move, and now this variation should be slightly better for black. But even knight f6 should be good, and now we can enter this variation with knight h5, knight c3, castles, knight e4, f5, knight g5, and knight e7 is critical here, because knight e6 is really not a good move after queen e7. And well, what does probably queen d3, and now just taking this knight. And I believe actually b5 is the right move here to discourage d6 check, and I think black is winning. There's some development issues, and rook b8 is coming, and if the bishop moves somewhere far, then rook e8. Something like bishop d2, rook b8, and say castles, then already bishop takes b2 is playable. I think this is actually one of the refutations. Yeah, even right here maybe b5 is just as precise. Alright, I think that's covering all the King's Gambit variations. Well, not everything in detail, but I think I went into the main variations and also some of the ideas behind it. And I hope you liked it. Thanks for watching.